Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Cannabis outperformed through the COVID-19 volatility. Joining me to discuss the factors driving performance is Saleem Daya. He's the analyst with Nasdaq Corporate Services. Saleem, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Hi, Jill. Thanks for having me.
All right, Saleem, what factors contributed to the outperformance in cannabis, and what index do you use to track that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Starting on the index piece, here at Nasdaq, for tracking the equity performance across cannabis names, we use the Selective North American Marijuana Index. And we use that index precisely because we find it tends to be quite encompassing of the cannabis sector in North America, capturing cannabis heavyweights, including the likes of Canopy, Aurora, the Cronoses, etc. Right? With respect to outperformance across the cannabis space that we observed over the second quarter of 2020, I think really two factors drove the outperformance of cannabis names. The first would have been the labeling of cannabis companies as essential amid the COVID-driven volatility and during the implementation of lockdown restrictions. And the second factor, essentially, was sales, essentially, right? So sales, particularly in U.S. states, the likes of Illinois and Colorado have seen almost historic level sales amid the COVID-driven volatility, and that's been really supportive of cannabis names, particularly U.S.-based.
Where did you see the buying?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the 500 million plus market cap bucket over the second quarter of 2020, we see that buying across cannabis names was really concentrated across hedge fund players. Now, given what we know about the shareholder composition of cannabis names historically, this is somewhat unsurprising, though it is worth noting that this would have reflected a reversal of the trend, namely the sell-off that we would have observed in the first quarter of 2020 amid that COVID-driven volatility. I think what is quite interesting, though, is if we look at non-index related buying across the 500 million plus market cap bucket over the second quarter of 2020, we do find some significant concentration across select names, an indication that investors, if they haven't already, have begun to pick winners and losers across the cannabis space. Capital Research Global Investors, for example, which per our data sets, public data in particular, was a top buyer over the space and over that market cap bucket, would have seen its holdings concentrated across U.S. listed name Scotts Miracle-Gro. And when we look at the institutional asset manager positioning across the cannabis space, we do find a tilt towards U.S.-based cannabis names as well.
Saleem, are you still seeing gains in cannabis, and where is it concentrated?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. We definitely continue to see gains across the cannabis space since the end of the second quarter of 2020. I believe the Selective North American benchmark is now up by around 9.3% quarter to date. And as you allude, those gains are not evenly dispersed, right? Those gains are essentially concentrated across a lot of US-based names. And the reasoning behind that will be, one, the state level sales that I noted earlier. Again, state level cannabis sales can continue to trend higher and in many cases, historic levels. And the second is a lot of US-based names have had incredible earnings performance, essentially, handily exceeding analyst expectations. And that's been quite supportive of US-listed cannabis names.
Well, we know investors are buying. What have you seen on the short side? Is that no one is selling their holdings, short interest has declined, or is that a combination of the two?
Yeah, I mean, so as you note, we have seen shorts across the cannabis space trend lower, particularly if we look at the Horizons North American Life Sciences Index ETF. We've generally seen aggregate shorts as well as short interest as a percentage of shares outstanding sit at around their lowest level in about a year. And what this does suggest is, we're seeing more long-term institutional assets come into the mix as the cannabis sector continues to evolve, and as we see those positive catalysts on the U.S. side in particular. And it's also an indication that investors are decreasing their bearish bets against the cannabis space as these long-only players begin to pick winners and losers.
All right, Saleem, and to wrap, what do the gains hinge on? What's the risk to this thesis?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at kind of what happens next in the cannabis space and a question about the extent to which momentum can be sustained, it's going to come as no surprise that the legalization question is going to be really important. So to what extent will progress in legalization actually be made? And of course, at the federal level, I think that question is largely answered given what we know about the election platforms. And so legalization at the federal level is likely not going to happen soon, at least. But what's interesting is the state level discussion, right? We've seen a continued push at the state level to legalize cannabis in the U.S., with states like New Jersey, Mississippi, and I believe South Dakota essentially voting on cannabis legalization come November. So the extent to which those legalization discussions actually take shape, actually form, will be a huge driver of, I think, continued momentum across the cannabis space.
Saleem, thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.